Hello and welcome to another episode of... Oh, it's just me today. Eric's having some technical difficulties, so I'm flying solo until we get those sorted out. I am Ryan, and normally I am joined by Eric, and we are the super data brothers. We are real-life brothers who work in the data and analytics industry. And am I excited today? We have got a good one. Laura Ludwig is joining us to talk about data storytelling. Laura has a lot of awesome experiences in the trenches of helping people understand, derive meaning from data, take action from it, and helping you figure out how to deliver those aha moments that I think all of us in the data world live for. At least we should be living for, because that's what it's all about, right? If you can take a smart human being who's out there trying to make an impact in the world and give them a piece of information that makes that light bulb go off over their head, I think that is the victory that we're all striving for. So give us a shout out in the comments. Let us know where you're dialing in from. It's probably an antiquated thing to say nowadays. Nobody dials in anymore, but let us know where you're watching from. And we will get rolling here in just a second. So Mike Norris, hello, friend of the show, Mike Norris. Robert Peter, good to see you. Got a few of our regulars rolling in. All right, let's bring Eric on. Eric, do you have audio?
I do. I can hear you now.
There you go. All right.
Hold on. Let me do my part. Super Data Brothers Super Show. Okay,
there you go. We were waiting on that. It's not the same without that. All right. So a couple, really just one note today, and that is before we, Monica, good to see you. Before we get rolling and bring Laura on, just a quick reminder that you can meet the Super Data Brothers live and in person coming up at a couple events. So October 16th through 19th in sunny San Diego at the DBT Coalesce Conference. I will be there. Of course, I'm the VP of Product Strategy at Good Data. We are sponsoring Coalesce. I will be co-presenting with my friend Yatsik a presentation about how to build an analytics environment that spoils data engineers. So you're not going to want to miss that. Make sure to get your tickets. If you are interested in going to Coalesce, get your tickets now, book your hotel now. It's filling up really fast. I can attest to that because it's already a struggle to get a hotel. So register now. Then January 27th, 2024, Data Day Texas. My friends, Data Day Texas is the best single day data conference you can possibly attend. The lineup this year is outrageous. If you go back a couple weeks, you'll remember we had Aaron Wilkerson on the show to talk about data leadership. Aaron was just announced as the data leadership keynote speaker at Data Day Texas. So we will have Detroit representing.
Oh, that's cool. There. Awesome.
And yeah, this is a one-day conference. It's practitioner focused. There's very little vendor BS. Even vendor presentations, the presentations given by vendors are practical and actionable and not sales pitches.
Yeah, the most you don't even know that they're from a given vendor until maybe the last slide in the contact me. It's like, yeah, and I'm the VP of whatever, and it's like, oh sweet, I'm the head of data, whatever. Oh, sweet.
Exactly. This is an awesome conference, one-day event, reasonably priced in Austin. So go ahead and register for that. And of course, if you want to get a discount, you're going to want to use code SuperDataBrothers, all one word in your registration. I believe that gets you 20% off. So go ahead. If you are attending Day-to-Day Texas, please do yourselves a favor, use the discount code.
Yeah.
And do us a favor so that we look cool to Lynn, who is the awesome organizer.
Who's the organizer,
yeah. All right. And with that, we're going to go ahead and bring Laura on. Any last words before we bring Laura on, Eric?
No, just, hey, Seth.
Hey, Seth. Yeah. Seth is another friend of the show calling in from Illinois. We got Richard from the UK, Chris calling in from Hungary. So it really an international audience for the Super Data Brothers show, which is one of the things that I like about doing it. I get to meet people all over the world thanks to this show. So thank you for tuning in. And if you're watching, do us a favor. Okay. If you're watching on LinkedIn, go ahead and hop over to our YouTube channel. If you want to support the show, youtube.com/C/Super Data Brothers, and leave us a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and of course, drop a comment.
The YouTuber trifecta of begging right there.
Yeah, exactly. It's we all got to serve our robot overlords, and it's no different here on the Super Data Show. And so we're trying to grow this channel. Got to get those metrics up. Want to see the line charts going up and to the right. So drop into the YouTube channel and like, comment, and subscribe to help support and grow the show. And with that, let's go ahead and bring Laura into the Super Data Brothers extended universe. Laura, welcome to the show.
Welcome.
Hello. Thank you for having me. This is exciting.
Yeah, great to have you.
Absolutely. So, we're really pumped to have you on here. I think there's been a resurgence lately of interest in kind of some of the bread and butter topics. I don't know that they ever went out of style, but we got real technical for a while there. And I think there's been a resurgence in interest in things like data storytelling, making sure you're delivering value and impact and not just on the elegance of a data pipeline, right? And so we know you have some real expertise and awesome stories to share when it comes to how to actually deliver value and tell stories with data that make a difference in the real world. So welcome to the show. And why don't we start, just give us some information on kind of your story, how you came into data and what it is that you do today.
Sure. So I'm actually going to start and go backwards. So day to day right now, I am a director for data analysis and visualization at a consulting firm. I live in Seattle, but we're across the West Coast of the US, over into Dallas and Chicago as well. I am a director, so I work with consultants. I help land them great opportunities. I help them grow and learn new things in the data space, in particular, data analysis, data viz, and then all of our sister practices, right? The data engineering, data science, business analysis, and all kinds of other things, whatever they're interested in. And then I'm also a consultant day to day. I work with a couple different clients on a day-to-day basis. I've got some stuff around some of my projects are around strategy, and some of them are down in the weeds. Let's build some dashboards. Let's analyze some data. So pretty wide array of what I'm doing right now. I've been a consultant my whole career. I've been in data for over 11 years. But the coming up in data as a consultant has been an interesting path because there's a lot of crossover between being an analyst and a consultant. And the skills involved in those are really overlapping. And so I've started at a Big Four consulting firm and transitioned. I've been at my current firm for about 7 years. Nice. And it's really great.
Yeah, that was actually my path into data and analytics. Like my internship in college was at a small consulting firm, but I did that for about 3 years before myself transitioning to I guess the public sector at a state university. So, yeah. So I both me and Ryan have some history with being consultants. So we definitely understand.
Yeah, absolutely. It's and it's very. I too have been in your seat with kind of wearing the leadership hat while also being working on projects. And I know it's a lot to juggle, but it also gives you a really good view of kind of the pulse of what's happening in the data industry. And so I think let's start with just this idea of data storytelling, and well, let's just set the stage. Like, in your mind, what does that even mean? Like, storytelling, like, okay, data storytelling, you think of storytelling, you think of, like, I don't know, I'm writing a movie about data, we got a picture book about, like, what exactly is it?
It's like the thumbnail with, like, fantasy and dragons and
yeah, exactly.
I mean, and there's so much breadth in how people think and talk about data storytelling. So when I think about it, I'm thinking about bringing the data into a human context. So in some cases, it's actually telling the story of how did this data get created and why does it matter? Telling the story of, oh, this is what the customer is experiencing, and let me help you understand the humanity of this data and what is happening. Other times, it's I need to present and I need to get these folks who know nothing about statistics, I need to get them on board with what I'm trying to get them on board with. I need to prove something to them through a presentation. And so I really need to lean into the storytelling techniques of hooking them. How do I hook them? How do I help them anticipate what's going to happen and then get really excited when I bring it home? For here's the point of why it is that we would want to do whatever it is that I'm pitching. So some of it is, how do you use data in the context of telling a story that way? And other times it's around, help me understand the story of what created this data and put that data in context.
Yeah. Do you find that that's one question I get fairly frequently? And I think it even came up at one point on last week's show, our interview with Robert Yee from Hyperquery, where someone, it's like, okay, so, like, should I literally be, let's say I'm working in Power BI or Tableau or whatever. Should I literally be, like, inserting a text box onto a dashboard that explains, like, how I came to this conclusion or where the data came from? I mean, is that a first step to data storytelling, or does it go beyond that?
Well, first of all, not on a dashboard.
Right.
But I mean, I would say using text to set the context is a helpful tool depending on what you're building, right? If you're building a dashboard, you need to be part of that story and helping the folks who are going to use it understand, how do they then go and tell a story with those numbers? What are these numbers telling me, and how do I need to navigate them? And it's less about telling the story in text, and it's more about helping the people be storytellers with a dashboard. And then there's a different variation, right? So setting context is super important, especially if you think, oh, I might be building this data product, this report, maybe it's a dashboard, but I would stick to that. Don't add too much text on a dashboard. Maybe you do like a walk me or something over it to give people context and help them learn how to tell the story and how to use the numbers in a story. But I would say that primarily you want folks to you want to make sure that people do have the context. So being able to say, this data was captured about customers in this particular space at this particular time. We know that data from 2020 looks way different than data from 2018 because the world was different, right? The context was different. The way that people shopped was different. The way that people engaged with our systems and just the movement towards digital has shifted, right? And so we want to make sure that that context is really explicit. And that's just one example. But making sure that context is clear is, I think, a great way to use text on a data product. It might be a footnote. It might be something else that you are including. It might be truly a text box if it's a really interesting element. Sure, yeah, you can add a text box, but you're probably not going to be adding things in layers over top of your dashboard to say, here's the insight, because the insights are going to change. And so context in text is good, but I wouldn't say gathering insights on something that's going to change and move. That's probably not quite as important.
Yeah, and do you find like is data storytelling? I'm always very curious. Like, is it more often a a dashboard is almost an operational oversight artifact, right? And we talk a lot. The whole dashboards are dead conversation that comes up every
It gets the clicks, baby.
year and a half. We even have we have an episode titled "Dashboards Are Dead," so we're guilty of it.
It's
too.
Tableau is dead, isn't it?
No, we have both.
we have Tableau is dead and zombie dashboards.
That's right. Okay. Yeah, they're undead.
Yeah, they're undead because they're still there. They're still walking amongst us.
But do you find like is storytelling something that is it most often come up in kind of a almost like a point in time analysis that you've been asked to provide? Like is that really where you need to lean into your storytelling skills rather than we're building some operational oversight? Is that kind of the context of it, do you think?
That is often the right place for it. Doesn't mean I don't get asked to do data storytelling on operational dashboards. At which point we have to shift the conversation to, okay, why do you want to tell a story? Why is it that you think this needs to be data storytelling? And then we actually get to the heart of it. Oh, you need your people to understand how to use this information to tell a story in such and such a meeting that happens every month. That's a very different kind of engagement that I would be endeavoring on, right? I've been part of a number of different projects where we are doing a point in time, we're doing this analysis and we need to present it. And that's one of those spaces where data storytelling is really exciting and is really engaging. I have a couple of examples of times where I've done that. So one was a couple years ago, a large software company that puts on events. They came to my consulting firm and said, hey, we really want to be able to tell, we've got these data scientists, they've done this great analysis, and we want to be able to tell the story to the folks who put on this event, who are, Hollywood producer type people, not data people. And we wanted to show, here's the impact that this particular event had on the metrics that we care about. And the only thing that this audience cares about is, did we drive enough change? Did we drive new clicks? Did we drive new traffic? Because that's what we're getting measured about and how we're going to get funding to do it again. And that's all they care about. And so how do we tell a story without drowning in the numbers? It was a really helpful tool to have the data scientist who did the analysis and found all the insights. He wrote up this massive white paper, which was great. It gave me all of the context and all of the content that I needed. And then we worked through, how do we shape this into something that's actually going to grab attention? How do we cater this towards what they care about? How are we going to keep them engaged for the 20 minutes that we have to tell them how great their event was or wasn't? And so that process was really fun. Lots of asking questions because I wasn't part of the analysis piece. I'm just there to help tell the story. And so lots of digging into those kinds of what did you do for the analysis piece of this? How did that work? And learning about that while also translating that into Hollywood producer speak. Following on from that, the second level person down said, hey, I actually want to understand a little bit more about the analysis and where that came from. Can you do a deep dive with me? So they came back and said, we want to understand more. This analysis relied significantly on people understanding confidence intervals. Now, if you remember back to your statistics 101 days, confidence intervals, that's kind of a weird concept, just without teaching a whole lot before that. So we used an analogy to explain confidence intervals. And we, in this thought experiment, pitted Tiger Woods against Serena Williams in a golf ball driving contest. They're at a driving range, they're hitting golf balls. And we tell them, you want to be as consistent as possible. I want you to get as tight a cluster. And you have 10 golf balls that you're about to hit. And so Tiger, being Tiger, he gets a really tight circle. He's good. He's accurate. This is his sport. He knows what he's doing. Serena comes in and she is a powerhouse, but this isn't her sport. If we'd asked her to put tennis balls in the exact same spot 10 times over, she could have done it. But golfing, a little less accurate. So her circle is a little bit bigger. And suddenly we can start talking about the size of that circle and what's the likelihood that we're going to find one of those golf balls in those spaces, and utilized visuals and a story of people with humans, named humans, to help explain a concept and push people forward into understanding. And they walked away with, I get it. I know why we care about these now in our context, because now I understand this technical concept with a visual of going to the driving range.
Yeah. How did you, I guess that's such a fascinating example. And I particularly like the way that the analogy you came up with wasn't just, okay, imagine two golfers, right? And like one is better than the other. It was like you really personalized it and put it in a way that like anybody can understand, because we're familiar with the people that you used as a reference, and it's just like viscerally understandable in a way. How did you go about coming up with that? Like, how did you get into the headspace of this kind of Hollywood event style producer in order to be able to communicate that?
Okay. I'm pretty sure this was a shower thought, so I'm really not sure exactly what the thought process was, aside from maybe we were on shampoo. I don't know.
Yeah.
But really thinking about what will people understand? And when you can put a person's name on something rather than, we're going to talk about Bob and Sally. No, let's put a real human behind this. This comes back to a concept that I learned from a fantastic friend and colleague, Lisa Kagan. She is a storyteller. She's a communications just queen. I love her. And she taught me all about Tabitha, which is a concept that Stephen King uses when he writes his novels. Stephen King does not write his novels for a large audience. He does not write it for the general American or the person who loves horror or thriller books. He writes his books for Tabitha, his wife. He has one person and she is named. He does not write for a persona. He doesn't write for a broad audience. He writes for her. And so everything that he is choosing to do in his storytelling is designed for an audience of one. And so taking some of that concept of who's the Tabitha here? Who do I care about? And what do they care about? And what are they going to engage with? So the more you can personalize both you're thinking about the audience and then how you're telling a story, that's a good thing. So looking at who are your customers? Pick a named customer, go meet them. I know one of the earliest storytelling pieces I did with a large telecom that I am also a customer of, and was able to leverage their new promotion. As I entered the promotion space, I was able to tell them my story about what I experienced. And it becomes a much more clear, this is what's going on. Okay. And that impacted Laura and her family. And it's suddenly not just this imaginary customer out in the wild. It's a real person. And so you could look on Twitter and find your customers who are unhappy and then pick one to make happy. And be able to look for what are those spaces where people are really engaged, and pick an audience person that is one person that you're working towards.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah. So like instead of thinking of like, oh, I have Bob the analyst and Susie the BA, you think of, I'm thinking of, I don't know, Richard, my literal coworker who's a literal analyst, right? And then like, okay, I know Richard. What would Richard want, right? And then you kind of use that as the frame to kind of kind of like make it more real when you're building stuff instead of just generic term people floating in like, I don't know, mind space or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. And persona, don't get me wrong, personas are super useful, especially as the second level. Hey, I don't know, I can't find a person. Or maybe it's a new product that doesn't exist yet. And I don't have a user yet. I don't have a person that's going to use this. I have to think about what kind of person would use this. At least give them a name.
Yeah.
If you're going to use a persona, at least give them a name. I'm working with some colleagues right now who we have some personas. We don't have exact people that we're targeting a particular product for. And we're calling them Alex 1, 2, and 3. And I'm not loving that, but it's a new team. And so I'm hoping to move them away towards that and be able to say, here, look, I went and found some Alex 1s. Let's think about Alex 1s as being these names. Instead of Alex 1.
Yeah, we just a quick Mike gives us a wave. So hey Mike, how's it going? Good to have you here today. Let me ask you this. At what point, like first of all, I just like, this is so spot on in my mind on the way that you need to be thinking about data in general, right? And this idea of personas and not just personas, but actual human beings being the endpoint of whatever it is you're doing. So when do you recommend people start? Okay, you're going into a new client, right? At what point do you start thinking about this? Is this really early on in the process, or does this come later after you've solved a few of the data style problems?
This is first. This is who is my data about? I've got to understand, where is this data? Who's generating this data? What are they doing? Are they using the tool properly? Because that's going to drive towards my data quality, which is going to tell me if I can even trust my data, which is before I start analyzing anything. So ultimately, knowing who I'm talking about and who I'm talking to are day one kind of questions. There might not be day one answers, but it's at least something I always start looking at right off the bat. I want to know what those things are as soon as possible, because it is about the humans, right? Data is useful to computers, but computers at this point still don't run the world. Humans run the world. And so they're the ones who are going to actually be making decisions using data. And they're also the ones that ultimately create data. Even if they were the ones that created the sensors that generate a boatload of data, a human made that, and a human started that process. So let's understand what they were trying to get at. So yeah, data is all rooted in something a human decided to do.
Yeah. So it's okay. So when you're going in, you're assessing a situation. It's the first thing you're thinking about before you ask, okay, let's talk about your data stack. Which pipeline is slow? What's broken, right?
Yeah.
Do you have the SQL skills to use DBT, or do we need to use something visual before you do?
Have you considered Hadoop? No.
Jeez.
2010 called.
That's
they'd like their reference back.
That's a Hadont right there.
That's a Hadont right there. Hey, that was my.
Before you do any of that, right? It's so the foundational thinking is really, who is this for, and what are we trying to communicate to them?
Yeah,
that is like the best piece of advice. And we always say on this show, like, you have to begin with the end in mind, right? And in the data world, the end is not your schema in Snowflake or your semantic layer or even your dashboard or your notebook or whatever it is. It's the people who receive that. And even beyond that, it's what are they going to do with it? Right.
Yeah. I think we've all been in spaces where I call it the report graveyard.
Yeah.
People have made things that, and they go out there, it goes out there to die, right? There's nothing, you make stuff that may not get used if you don't think about how humans are going to use it and interact with it and find value in it. And that's, I've built enough of those that I'm like, I don't want to do that anymore. I only build things that people are going to use.
Yeah.
In order to do that, you have to start with who's going to use it so that you know what they're going to care about, because you're both building a product and it might be about a product. So it's very meta in that way, not meta with a capital M, but Just, you're building a product about a product. You have to be thinking like a product owner when you're building a data anything. In addition to working with the product owner, that will also help you work with the product owner better to understand what they actually care about, right? So if you're taking on that persona, then you understand their persona better and can anticipate what might they care about.
So how do you, like, if you're in a, let's say someone's watching this and they're on a data team that is really stuck in kind of the,
table to dashboard pipeline, or
and they're just like, we get these tickets and we just do the tickets, and whatever the user asks for, they say I need this, we just do it, and then we say, okay, the ticket's done, and we move on. How do you start with this more kind of product or human centric thinking?
You start with asking good questions, and some of the best questions are why. In some contexts, when you ask why, people get defensive. So I also caveat this with, sometimes it's better to ask a question of how will this information change your world? Not how are you going to use this, or how will knowing this be useful, because then they're going to say, oh, well, you're trying to gatekeep. I want to get my data. And it's really around how is this information going to change your world? Because and then you give the clarification that so that I can look for things that might add to that mission. You give them the what's in it for me, right? If you're asking them to tell you more information about how is this going to change your world, you're asking them to do more work. And you've got to give them a reason why that would be useful. What's in it for me? I might be able to say, oh, this analyst, this person that's going to build me something, they can see what's going on in the database where I might not be able to see that. They might have some additional insight and be able to suggest something different or something additional that's going to enhance the answers to my questions and is going to further change my world. And so helping set that context and just a couple of exchanges of, okay, cool. And that's where you start. And you just start asking those questions, and it gets people thinking about, how is this going to change my world? Sometimes they might go, oh, it's interesting, but it's not going to change anything. Maybe I don't need that. Or I need something different and I'm not sure what to ask for. But in order for this to change my world, I need it in this way. And suddenly you have a richer conversation. It does require that you have to have a little bit of wiggle room. You have to find ways to create a little bit of wiggle room to have some conversations before you just drive through metrics. So in some cases, if you are truly in a machine, where I think many of us have been, where build reports, get it out the door, close the ticket, I'm measured by how many tickets I closed, that becomes a conversation that needs to happen at more the exec level from a strategic perspective, because what we measure matters. And if we're measuring people based on their ticket throughput, that may not actually be as good of a measure of how useful is something. And how good is this team that is doing all of the ticket building, or not ticket building, the dashboard building based on tickets.
That is, I mean, that's such a good advice for data leaders out there too, I think. And that is, if I kind of paraphrase you in a way, it's like, you need to think about the incentives you're giving your team, right? And so many times I've been in situations where, as an employee, as a consultant, as someone who's just having a beer with another data person somewhere, and we're talking, where it's clear that a company is laser focused on the incentives that are being provided externally, right? And understanding the economics and the incentives of the marketplace that they operate in. But internally to the company and within the data team, they have not at all thought through how the ways in which they're incentivizing their data engineers and analysts and BI people, and how that actually leads to the outcomes. And is that aligned? If you want a creative, problem-solving data team, and what you're doing is every other Monday you have a meeting where you you have a huge KPI of how many tickets we closed. Maybe those two things aren't lined up.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And making sure those strategic, and this is something that I started figuring out as a leader, right? When I stepped into setting metrics for my team, thinking about how am I measuring the things that actually matter? And what are those proxies? And where do I want them to demonstrate engagement?
Yeah. How do you recommend, how would you recommend measuring what metrics would you look at if you were a data leader other than, okay, closed tickets?
It's an excellent question and is going to depend so much on context.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, I would say I would be working on building out a framework or a way to understand the quality of how connected am I to the people that I'm providing service to. So depending on your org structure, you might have, if you have a data team that is central and they receive tickets and they engage with other departments, other orgs within your company, then it becomes how rich is that relationship with that org? How many things have we been able to help them with? What are their metrics? And how do our things that we've built drive forward into their metrics? And so and then you can start, from a proxy measurement is how many of these people have we connected with? How many of these leaders have we connected with? Because if you're getting leadership engagement from another organization, that's going to trickle down. If they care about data and doing data well and utilizing data to drive their agenda within their team, you're going to start to see more and more engagement on all the levels below them. So how connected is the data team with the leaders in an organization? And there's a number of different ways you can measure that, but in some ways it's going to be a little bit subjective. You could look at things like number of meetings and number of things that we've produced. But again, that's not a great proxy for how much value. Because what if you build that one great thing that everybody's able to use and drives tons of value without being able to articulate, well, we had 800 meetings about this year. That's a terrible metric. I don't want to have 800 meetings about anything.
Right.
So we don't want to incentivize that for sure. But finding a way to effectively measure what that relationship quality looks like amongst different orgs is a great way to start shifting the conversation to being about value and people versus throughput and the Henry Ford of data, the assembly line of data. We don't want to do that either. That's not fun. That's not the fun part. And so that, being able to, you can also measure the engagement of your team. And how much are they seeing, I have the opportunity to do true analysis versus I'm a ticket taker, and starting to measure that shift. And you're likely to always have some balance of those two things, but finding the balance of them is an important thing within every organization.
Yeah, I think that's very wise too. I mean, it's you need to there's some degree of just someone put in a request and like we need to deal with the request, right?
Always.
Yeah. But finding that balance.
Yeah. Hey, we've got a comment from Seth here. Love the context setting talk. We stress establishing the context so much with a focus on landing pages and or FAQ pages within the dashboard to give that information. And within the dashboard, using hover, text, drill down to expand context to know why the data/data point matters. Yeah, that's very true, Seth. That's a very good comment. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that can be really challenging, especially if you're working with users who wouldn't think on a report, oh, should I click on this? Should I hover on this? There's an element here of, do you make it look like a report or do you make it look like a website, like a web page, website? Tried to say those two words together.
The web sage.
The web sage, which, maybe that's Google. I don't know. Or ChatGPT. But they're building things to look like, oh, I should click on this. And learning some of those UX techniques of how do you get somebody to interact with something.
Yeah.
I'm currently mostly building reports that look like applications. Where I can, I'm building reports that look like web pages. And so there aren't 18 tabs on the side that show all the different ways of getting to something, but there is a navigation bar. And you click on that and it takes you to the next page, and there's a back button so that you can go back to the front page. You can set some slicers on this first page. Oh, I want to look at the data coming from this government organization and this government organization, and I care about these 3 years. You can set that at the beginning and then just go click and see, oh, what was happening in those different metrics on these different pages. Cues on screen. I like to use italicized text because it often is the hint, like that's one of the UX cues a lot of people will find to be like, oh, this is an instruction. I'm supposed to do something. And so including just a little italicized text that says hover to see more. I don't tell them what more they're going to see, just that they should hover. And that gives them a clue to, oh, this is something I can engage with. And suddenly you open up the interactivity of many of our modern tools that you can configure and create an engaging way of working with data that's not just, hey, I got this report from IT. But I have this portal. And a lot of people will use that term. I want a data portal. Okay, cool. That means I'm going to build you something that looks and feels like a website.
Yeah. And that's one area where, if dashboards are dead, which again, they're not, but if they are dead, it's very interesting. Like, how did you make this evolution from kind of just here's a dashboard to more of this application thinking? And you just gave some great examples of it. Are you also doing things like, I know sometimes when people think of data apps, they kind of think about, okay, maybe it does some sort of write back or it triggers something in some other application. Are you finding that sort of thing is also making its way into the analytics interface?
Absolutely. Write back capability is definitely, I've been asked for that multiple times. There are ways to hack that together. I'm mostly a developer in the Microsoft stack, so I do a
Power
lot
BI.
Oh yeah, Power BI, and then you build a Power App that gathers data somehow. Typically, I've got one example where I've built an interface for users to engage with some data that is an output from a data science project, a model that runs on a regular basis. And I need to engage with the humans. The humans are the ones who know if this output is correct. This is meant to shorten the amount of time that they spend reviewing the data. And so, but they are still the experts. They still know better than the machine learning model. And so there's, in the data science world, it's called human in the loop. And so you present the data out, and we wanted to have one place where they could say, oh, no, this isn't right. The model got this one wrong. And I wanted them to be able to click on something and go, oh, no, you need to relabel that. That needs to be this. And so I have a disconnected slicer and a Power App that gathers the value of that disconnected slicer and drops it in a blob storage. And then it has a pipeline that it gets ingested into the back end that the machine learning model then will look at any of those relabels and account for any of that adjustment when it runs next. So there's ways to do that. And it's definitely becoming more and more of a thing that's getting asked for in my experience. And I also the past couple of years, I've been very much working on being the front of the data science modeling efforts. So working with data scientists to present their outputs to real humans.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting too. We try not to do too much tool talk on this show, but just when it comes to Microsoft, well, I take that back. Sometimes that's all we talk about. But that was just the type of thing that forever we've been asked for forever, and the challenge always was like BI tools were these discrete things offered by vendors, and the expectation was like, okay, I want to do notification from BI. So the BI vendor is now going to have to build some sort of notification system. And many of them did that. And they always sucked compared to, an application that was like built for integration or built for notification or something like that. Given that you work so much in the Microsoft ecosystem, are you finding that like, because I don't, right? Has Microsoft really, because they offer like everything as a company, have you found that like working in that ecosystem, you are able to deliver these types of integrations in a way that maybe in the past we struggled with?
I mean, the fact that I'm not a Power Apps developer, but I was able to build something that could gather data and put it back into an overall system, and that there were connectors and there were places where I could hook into things. I think they are moving in that direction of creating more plug and play um, ways of putting things together. And you're only, in some ways, you're only limited by how much depth you have in some of the tech and what you can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
But there's with more and more things coming out for the no and low code platforms within Microsoft, the Copilot pieces that I still have yet to play with.
Yeah. They
I'm
look
honestly
cool.
They look so cool, but I'm a little scared of them. None of my clients have implemented them yet because they're still testing them and things. But there's a lot of ways that we could engage with some of those integration points and being able to do automation. So RPA, being able to do a lot of that and having something that's low code for that is more and more I'm seeing more and more of even my consultants doing it in their engagements. I can think of at least 3 other folks who've built some kind of Power App integration, either for write back or triggering, changing values in the model. From a data science perspective, being able to do some fine tuning and send things back and re-trigger a pipeline. And then also row level security enabled report send out. So distributing and doing email notification on things that are row level security controlled within reports. So there's all kinds of cool stuff that you could be doing, especially with that Power Platform overall, which now includes Power BI and Power Automate and Power Apps. And I don't know, there's probably something else.
And Power Naps too.
Yeah, Power Naps.
taking a power nap too.
Yeah, that's one of my hypotheses is that it's going to be very hard to be an independent BI. Like all you do is build dashboards, right? And like just the very front end without deep integrations into other processes or without things like a semantic layer, the ability to store and process data in a meaningful way. Like it's just gonna be really hard for all we do is BI tools to, I think it's gonna be a tough decade for them, is my prediction.
Agreed. Yeah. We're working on upskilling most of our folks who are in that space. It's like, do you want to go technical or do you want to go more business side? And thinking about those are both directions that you can take. You can go get Snowflake certified, go get Databricks certified, like learn some data engineering basics. Or, let's go take some business classes, go do some practice on truly articulating the business value and think about analysis, not just from a data perspective, but also the processes, or change. How do I help people change their behaviors based on data? So that organizational change space is really an interesting intersection with data as well. So I'm encouraging all of my folks to intersect with something else.
So speaking of like change and convincing people to change, so like how important is, I would say, like auditability, right, for telling a data story that people can trust, right? Have you ever told someone a data story and they just look at you and say, "I don't believe that," you know? So like, is that something that happens?
It happens. It happens. Yeah, I think everybody who's worked in data has been asked, "I don't believe those numbers." And that's where being able to say, "I'd be happy to dive in and show you where I got them from." If you know going into a meeting, for example, that somebody's going to be skeptical, it's like, I'm actually ready for that. And just being ready to click through and say, here's the assumptions that I made, and here's the things that I found, and here's the stuff I excluded, and what are all of those little decisions that you made in an analysis that they might have a different opinion on, and be able to say, I made this decision on purpose and I made it for a reason. I can also get way deep into design decisions versus following rules from a visualization perspective, but that's probably a totally other topic for another day. But the idea of being able to articulate, here's where I didn't have information, where I filled in a gap, and inviting them into, okay, cool, you're curious, let's dive in, and being curious with them rather than taking it as taking it personally, being like, I'm happy to engage. I want to approach this with curiosity and figure out where maybe I missed something. And otherwise, I want to give you a safe space to change your mind. Because I find that a lot of times when people dig in, like, no, that can't be right. When you suddenly prove that you're right and they don't have space to change their mind, they just get more and more dug in. And it's harder. It becomes a cultural problem.
Yeah.
Of, the first opinion that gets spoken is gospel. And you want to create a space where, no, let's actually go see what the data says. Oh, I made a mistake. Okay, cool. Let's make an adjustment there. Boom, done. How about this? Like, we worked on this together, and that also creates ownership, and they're less likely to come after you for an analysis if they were part of it, because they're also part owner of this insight.
I think we just left data advice and entered the realm of really good life advice with that one. Give people space to change their minds. Don't force them to dig in their heels.
Include them in the process of discovery, so it's their insight too.
Yeah, that's no matter what field you work in. This is excellent advice.
I worked with the change team as like my very first engagement with data, and so some of the things that they talked about and taught me by osmosis, I can't separate from my data world. And that's very much a change management principle. So anyway.
Yeah. So we've only got a few minutes left. And one topic I wanted to make sure we covered, and unfortunately, we're probably not gonna be able to talk about as much as I wanted, but I did want to ask you about your experience working with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to produce the Goalkeepers Report.
Yeah.
Can you just kind of tell people what that is and how you went about building it, and maybe some of the decisions you made for when it comes to the storytelling in that report?
Yeah. So the Goalkeepers Report is a yearly report that's been coming out since, I think it was 2016 was the first year. And it's to measure how well the world is doing against the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. So the UN has set a number of different goals, things like, no poverty in the world, improved maternal health and well-being. Let's make sure we've got gender equality. Just these tiny little goals, no big deal.
Probably a quick fix.
Yeah, just definitely a quick fix. We're going to fix it in
prod. Just fix it in prod.
Exactly. So there was this.
I guess we are fixing it in prod because there's no test server.
There is no test server for global development. But this report is meant to measure how well are we doing, and they work with some really brilliant academics to then forecast, are we going to hit those goals by 2030, which is the deadline that has been set. And they do some forecasting to say, okay, if we stay on this current trajectory, this is how it's going to be. If it's good, if it's bad. And so you get a window of what that forecast might look like. And then as they were publishing this report, they knew they needed to have some narrative around it. So it has become this big flagship report that comes out from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation every September. It came out on Tuesday for this year. So I encourage you to go check it out. There's a couple of different essays, one from Bill and one from Melinda, and then there's exploring the data. And that was really where I was involved, was exploring the data. I worked on this project while I was staffed there back in 2020. And I was ingrained. I was deployed out to this team. I was working with them every day. So there were writers and there were policy people and there were folks just pushing this thing forward and keeping us on track. We would engage with different stakeholders and subject matter experts as we needed to, and we had to craft the narrative. And I started on this project in February of 2020. So we thought we were going to talk about climate change. And then suddenly we had a pandemic that we had to talk about. And it's like, oh, okay, well, that's another existential world ending problem. Cool. We're going to think about and talk about existential problems for 6 months. So I dug into the data and we were trying to find what is the story. So it was a lot of data journalism and figuring out how do we articulate different things. And ultimately it came down to, we've got to talk about how this pandemic impacts our ability to hit these goals. And so that's what we did. We talked about, and they adjusted forecasts and we gathered new data. There was a fast and furious data collection process that happened in June and July of 2020 to get a feel for what's happening in sub-Saharan Africa around vaccine delivery and for just regular childhood vaccines.
Right.
And all of the different things that you would care about, what's happening with people's finances. Are lockdowns impacting people's ability to work? Is that creating all of these other things that the pandemic might be creating? And so we were trying to get as much data as we could measuring what that impact was, and we're able to reflect it in our report. So this year, and I always look forward to the Goalkeepers report coming out because I know that there's code on the back end that is part of the process that I wrote. And so it's always a little point of like, oh, I helped write the code that made this process better. But also because I know that it's going to help me understand what's going on in the world. And it's going to be a reset on, okay, I had an assumption about what the world was like when I was in college or when I was working at the Gates Foundation. I have an idea what the world was like. How is it different? Because the world is always changing and it's always generally, in many ways, getting better. Mm-hmm. But we only ever see the bad stuff in the headlines. And so getting that reset is always a helpful thing.
Yeah, I would recommend anybody check it out. It's at gatesfoundation.org. You can find the report. It is both a fascinating and informative read and a great example of data storytelling, combining narrative, charts, images, infographics, all of that sort of stuff in one go. And so if you're looking to understand like how the real professionals like Laura put something like this together and what the output could look like, it's a great example of it. And so everybody go check it out and see Laura's excellent work. Okay.
To be clear, I was not part of this year's work. So
right.
All the credit to the folks who are working on it this year, but
yep.
It's a good example of
good
data storytelling.
It's really cool. So check it out. Okay. We are just about out of time here. So we always end the show with 2 questions. The first one is, what advice do you have for someone who's looking to make a move into a data career? What should they focus on? What's the most important thing for them to do?
Most important, learn how to ask good, high leverage questions. Because you can always learn the tech, you can always look stuff up on Stack Overflow, but learning how to ask a good, high leverage question, which is a question that actually drives the conversation forward, that is the most important thing in the data world that I can think to encourage folks to do.
Yeah, that's great advice. It's it's nobody ever says learn SQL when I ask that question.
We haven't gotten there.
Even though it's very important, it's never the most important thing. So let that be a clarion call to all of us to improve the soft skills. We always say on this show, the soft skills are the hard part. And so thank you so much for coming on the show. You're a great guest, and we really enjoyed having you on. Where can people catch up with you? Where should they go to learn more about you?
I'm on LinkedIn. That's probably the best public spot. I'm also accessible at Unify Consulting if you're looking for consulting services. But in general, just hit me up on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to connect.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Laura. It was great having you.
Yeah,
thank you both. Appreciate it. This was fun.
All right. So, what a great guest Laura was.
Yeah, awesome show.
Absolutely. So, let's see. Points of business before we let you go here. First of all, thank you for attending another episode of the Super Data Brothers Show. You can catch us every week at this time, 12 o'clock Eastern, 9 o'clock Pacific. We're, like I said, every week available or alive during this time. Coming up next week, we're going to be doing an episode about how to prioritize data requests. This is a Super Data Brothers learning episode with just the brothers covering how to prioritize data requests. And then coming up on October 5th, we're going to have world-bestriding data engineering colossus Joe Reese on the show to talk about all things data. Really looking forward to that. You're not going to want to miss it. Also, one last quick plug. Meet the Super Data Brothers coming up on October 16th through 19th at the DBT Coalesce Conference in San Diego. I will be there. I'll be giving a presentation. I will be rocking. I will be there repping good data, and I will be bringing some Super Data Brothers shirts, the coveted Super Data Brothers shirts. So if you are at DBT, track me down and say hello. Limited supply, so you're going to want to say hello early. Easiest place to meet me is probably at the Good Data booth or at my session. And then Data Day Texas, January 27th, 2024, a one-day practitioner-focused conference. This is the conference to go to if you are looking to meet a lot of the thought leaders out there in data in a super chill, kind of vendor BS-free environment. It's a big old data party in Austin. We especially like to go because we live in Detroit, and going to Austin in January is a treat.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, so
it's actually like the conference that kicked off the Super Data Brothers. We had been talking about it for basically years, and then we said we just need to do something. There's this conference. Let's just go to the conference, and we went. And we're like, oh, this is awesome, and we met other people who were doing what we're doing now, and we're like, oh, we could actually do this, and then we did it. And
it is definitely an I could actually do this conference. Like whatever your aspiration is, if it's to get into the data influencer game, or if it's to become a data scientist or a data engineer. It is like,
or just learn a bunch of cool stuff, like what's up and coming.
Super practical conference, one day practitioner focused. You're going to love it. Make sure to, when you register, make sure to use the code Super Data Brothers. It's all one word. In order to get 20% off your registration, Super Data Brothers at checkout when you register for Data Day Texas. We will be there. Joe Reese will be there. The Tech Bros will be there. Makiko, I don't even know how to pronounce Makiko's last name. Baisley, I think, will be there. Many of our guests will be there, so you should be there too. And we look forward to seeing you. We're giving a presentation at this conference as well. Okay. Any last words before we let the people go, Eric?
No, I think that's about it.
All right. So until next time, next week at 12 o'clock Eastern, don't miss it. I am Ryan.
I am Eric.
And we are the Super Data Brothers. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.